I want to welcome everyone to the uh, Pathways Level 2 workshop. It's all about you. And our presenter is Chris Nelson, DTM. She is currently our program quality director. She has handled most of the club roles. She is a writer. She is a scholar. And she even has a blog that you can visit. She's been a Toastmaster for 6 years, and she definitely has her handle on pathways. So be ready for a interesting and well-informed meeting. I give you Chris Nelson.
Woohoo! Thank you very much, Elton, and welcome to Pathways Level 2. It's all about you. We are recording this session, and so if you don't want to be seen on camera, please turn off your video now. We will have the recording available later on for anyone who's interested, particularly those who aren't able to be here today. One of the things that has always frustrated me since Pathways has been introduced is the very simple fact that people look at it and go, oh, but that's different. Oh, but I don't know what to do there. Oh, but they're telling me what to do. And so I've got a few key objectives for this workshop that I'd really like to share with you because I enjoy Pathways. I find it's fun. I find it's informative. And as someone who's a little bit of an introspective geek, I really enjoy Level 2. By the end of this workshop, I hope you do too. So we're going to look at understanding Level 2, what's in it and why it matters. We're going to identify some solutions to some of the common challenges that people face. And we're going to develop some ideas together that will help our clubs, our members, and ourselves to deliver positive, engaging, and fun speeches within Level 2 projects. As human beings, we don't usually like to be told what to do. If you have cats, you already know this because they certainly aren't fond of it either. As Elton mentioned earlier, that's why they called it herding cats. And that's one of the things that we see in Level 2. It's got some very specific projects that look like they have some very narrow parameters. I don't think they really are. But as someone who doesn't really love being told what to do, let me tell you a story. Many, many years ago, in an ancient galaxy far away, I was about 6 years old. It was a PA day at my school, and my friends and I went to our younger siblings' preschool for the day. At the preschool, they said, we're going to draw a cat. Now, in my infinite wisdom of 6 years old, I felt that I could draw a cat just fine. I didn't listen to any of the instructions they gave. I didn't follow any of the instructions they gave. You know how this goes. Draw a circle, draw 2 triangles, draw more circles, all these things. This is about what the finished cat should have looked like. My cat looked a little bit more like this. As you can tell, I'm not a brilliant artist, and I really wasn't a brilliant artist at 6. But that is where not wanting to follow rules that I didn't understand and didn't agree with took me. As you can see, the result is perhaps a little bit less desirable than the intended one. And so I want to ask you now, how independent are you? You're going to play with the annotation tool here, and I'm going to show you how to do that. If you go up to the top of your screen where it says you're viewing Chris Nelson's screen, you can mouse over that and you'll see an option to annotate. Under that option, what I'd like you to do is pick the stamp, and you can take any stamp and place it wherever on that line you think you fit. Are you always obedient? Are you a free thinker? Or are you something in the middle? All right, people are finding tools. We've got some obedient people. We've got a lot of free thinkers. We've got some people in the middle. We've got some people who define themselves in a few ways. That's always fun. There we go. But that's one of the neat things about this whole project, is that we have the ability to actually control this a little bit more than we think. Let's look at what the level 2 projects are. Some people may think there's only a few. There's more than you think. We have understanding your communication style. Let's click back on there. There we go. Understanding your leadership style. An introduction to Toastmasters mentoring. Most of you have probably seen all of these projects. We have active listening. Connect with your audience. Effective body language. Managing time. Know your sense of humor. And cross-cultural relations. Now, chances are pretty good, as you've looked at these projects, you can find a tiny bit of relevance somewhere in your life for all of these. And could we have poll number 2? And let's have a quick look at which projects you've done and which projects you're familiar with. So you should be able to click as many of those as apply to you.
Can we ask questions, Chris?
You may.
Okay. Because I brought up my Easy Speak website for my dynamic leadership path, and it only lists the 3 that you mentioned on the previous slide. The leadership style, communication style, and the Toastmasters mentoring. The active listening for that project is in level 3.
That's right. And some of the level 3 electives appear as mandatory projects in level 2. So Bruce, thank you for that question. What you're seeing is the projects that apply to level 2 in your path.
Okay.
When you choose your second path, you'll notice that you've got some different options available for level 2 in that path. So all of these 9 projects relate to one of the paths. They don't necessarily relate to all of them, and there are not electives in level 2. That's why you're seeing some differences there. So Alton, if we could end the polling. It looks like most people have voted. And have a look at the results there, please. Okay, so let's see what we've got. We've got one person who's done cross-cultural understanding, one who's done introduction to Toastmasters mentoring. A couple of people have done understanding your communication style, understanding your leadership style, and a lot of people haven't completed any level 2 projects yet. Well, you're in a great place for that, and I hope you approach them with tremendous enthusiasm. Let's stop the share results. There we are. And have a look at these projects and what they entail. And someone's been having fun with annotation. Whoops, that's not what I wanted you to do.
Chris, I annotated instead of clicking. Was that wrong?
It's okay, Mike, I'll forgive you. We'll just clear the drawings and move on, and that's okay. So let's have a look at understanding your communication style. The purpose of this project, as expressed, is to learn about different communication styles and to identify your primary style. And as those who were in the meeting earlier heard, my primary style is direct. And there's a speech I've done a couple of times for this project called Are You Listening? And what I talk about there is how the fact that I'm a direct communicator also means that I listen well to direct communication. Sometimes that means that unless you're telling me something right in my face, I don't see it. The overview of the project is that you complete a questionnaire to identify your style, and you think about its impact on your professional and personal relationships. I'm going to make the humble suggestion here that unless you don't ever deal with other human beings, at all that your communication style, in all likelihood, affects how you deal with your professional and personal relationships. How many people here are in a relationship, a marriage, a common law relationship, work with somebody, have children, have parents? I'm going to say most of you. Exactly. Have you ever thought of a time? Can you think of a time when how you and your partner or your parent or your child communicates didn't go well because you had different styles? Think about that story. Hold on to that story in your head, because especially for those who haven't yet done this project, you're going to want to use that story. And we'll talk a little about that. Understanding your leadership style. You learn about different leadership styles and identify your primary style. And again, when you're looking at this, the way you lead impacts the way you deal with people. If you've ever worked for a bureaucratic leader and you're someone like me who doesn't necessarily take instruction well, you've probably already worked out that understanding a leadership style is something that can be really important. And again, it's something that relates to your personal life and your professional life. And just like in the communication project, you complete a questionnaire to identify your style. You think about how it impacts the people around you, people you're leading, and you're always leading. You're leading your family, you're leading your friends, you're leading in your Toastmasters club, you're leading in your business. How can you adjust that style to be more effective? Because if you're leading effectively, you're going to be a whole lot less stressed out, and so are the people you're leading. And introduction to Toastmasters mentoring. We look at how Toastmasters envisions mentoring. But just as importantly, and I would give you more importantly, we consider the impact and the importance of having a mentor. Elton, could you let Tony in, please? Having a mentor is something that happens throughout our lives. If you'd asked me before I was a Toastmaster if I'd ever had a mentor, I probably would have said no. But now that I have a better understanding of what mentoring is and what I gain as a protege from mentoring, I can look back in my life and see all kinds of people who've mentored me in a variety of different capacities. There are a whole lot of possibilities there. There's a lot of other level 2 projects, as we saw. Active listening. In active listening, you basically act as the table topics master and reflect your listening skills by making some comment on what the table topics participants have said. Pretty easy, right? But it's also a good way to develop that other side of communication. Connect with your audience, connect with an unfamiliar audience. And again, this one's also a level 3 elective. Back to that communication thing. Much communication isn't verbal. They say 93% is nonverbal. Part of communication, once again. Managing time. This is a huge component of leadership. If you're like me, you probably know at least a few DTMs who stick very strongly to the definition of don't time me. But by observing your time and managing your time, you're also building on your leadership skills. This all ties into your life. It also ties into, standing there waiting for your partner to finally walk out the door so that you're not late for that wedding. Know your sense of humor. As speakers, this ties closely into communication, and it's an area where we all learn and grow and gain and can develop our speaking opportunities further. It's also a leadership skill, because when you're in a situation that is uncomfortable or unpleasant, being able to inject a little bit of humor is sometimes a great way to lighten things. Cross-cultural understanding. I think this is a project that applies more and more to our lives, and especially in the Greater Toronto area, where we've got all kinds of cultures that we deal with. Understanding them and how we deal with them is a key part of communication and might change the way that we communicate or even the way that we lead or mentor someone. And effective body language. Anybody who's watched any of our speech contests has a pretty solid idea that body language is a very important part of being a good speaker but it's also something that can be a factor in your leadership. If you're talking to somebody who's got their arms crossed all the time, chances are you're reading some things into that. We're back to Roxy again. And if you look at the projects that we've considered so far, you'll see that they all have a theme: communication, leadership, and mentorship. And unless you're hiding in a cave somewhere or in a noisy orange bag, you're applying these to every aspect of your life, every single day. Level 2 also lays the foundation for everything you learn and everything you do beyond your club. Remember that communication, leadership, and mentorship trio. Those are areas that you apply when you're a club officer. You apply those when you go beyond your club and become an area director, when you go beyond and become a division director. They're qualities you apply as a club coach, as a sponsor, as a mentor. Communication, leadership, and mentorship are key in all three of those. As a workshop facilitator, how you communicate and how you lead is also important. Mentorship opportunities sometimes develop out of that as well. As a club officer trainer, again, these are important skills. And by developing them in level 2, you get the opportunity to bring your best to any of those roles within and beyond your club. Now, if you don't think that examining who you are, how you behave, and why you do the things you do is important, let me take you to Facebook. We already know that Mike is Ariel, but if you've ever clicked on one of these quizzes and tried to figure out which Disney princess are you, which 80s rock band are you, you're interested in finding out about yourself. But doing so through your Toastmasters Level 2 project isn't going to compromise your personal information. It isn't going to share all that with all of your friends on Facebook. And it's probably going to give you a little bit more of a concrete answer than one of 9 songs from the 1980s. There are all kinds of personality tests. They're everywhere we look. And I'm going to suggest that a whole lot of people have probably done one. Elton, could we have the next poll, please? Number 3. Perfect. Okay, so it looks like a few people have done some of these tests. Elton, could we end the polling and share the results, please? Perfect. So a couple of people have done disc profiling. I've done a number of those myself. They've done the Myers-Briggs, or 16 personalities as it's sometimes called, and I've done a few that I don't know the names of as well. I understand that. But it's interesting that no one in this poll said they haven't done one. Okay, can we take the results down, please, Elton? A lot of these personality tests cost money. You can go online to 16personalities.com and do a Myers-Briggs test for free. But most of the DISC personality tests cost, as do many others. In level 2, you have a chance to take a personality test focused on your communication skills, on your leadership skills, at no charge. That's a pretty good bonus. There we go. So I'd like you to unmute yourselves, and we can have some open conversation here since we're a fairly small group. I want to know what you see as the key values in looking at these projects. What are you finding as we talk about it now, or as you've perhaps done the projects already? What do you see as useful? How would you apply communication skills and understanding your style, leadership skills and understanding your style, or understanding mentoring and why it's valuable to have a mentor or to mentor someone. How do you apply that to your life?
Well, I think, Chris, if I may, I think one of the real values is understanding that there are a variety of different communication styles, that there are a variety of kinds of people that you're going to have to work with and for, and perhaps even supervise in some of the leadership role. And certainly in mentorship, it's important to understand that that everyone isn't going to be a clone of you, that people will hear things differently than you say them, and understanding that that's not abnormal, that is normal.
Yes.
And in the way that we work with people, the more that we can understand the different direction people are coming from, I think the more effective we can be.
I agree completely. Thanks, Mike. Anybody else?
I think that out of all of this, you learn so much about yourself. You discover, I think, much more about yourself than anyone else. And because you learn more about yourself, you're able to develop a communication style that is open, multi-level, and you're able to engage with people, many types of people rapidly.
Yes.
Wanna,
Any other, sorry, somebody
Yep.
else? Any other comments on key value in these projects?
Yeah, so just kind of tagging on to Elton's comments there, because I'm working on 2 paths right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's 3 level 2 projects in both of them, and
Yes.
of the 6 project names or titles, 4 of them have the word "your" in it. Understanding your leadership style, your communication style, your sense of humor, and connect with your audience. So to me, it's getting to know myself.
Yes, absolutely. And how do you think knowing yourself applies to how you deal with others in your life, Bruce?
Well, hopefully I don't get divorced, and hopefully I don't lose friends.
Both good objectives.
So, yeah, my plan of attack with all of this is to be. I think I'm an amazing person to begin with, but I want to become an even better person.
That is fabulous. I think you're an amazing person too.
Thank you, Chris.
Anybody else have some thoughts and comments on key values and understanding communication, leadership, and mentoring?
I think this is Glynis. I think
Hi,
these
Glynis.
are key, really key. And I think that the way Toastmasters has structured this second level is so wonderful, because really how you communicate with people, how you lead them, and basically once you learn to lead yourself is the only that's the only when you'll be able to lead others. So really self-awareness is where it all starts. Once I know my communication style and my leadership style, then I'll be able to then go to the third step of mentoring somebody, because that's a very critical thing. You cannot be assigned a mentee and then you don't know anything about your own communication style, their communication style, and how will you mentor. Then it's going to be clashes all the time. So I think it's very crucial and critical, and I think that they've really thought this out the way they've structured level 2, about first starting with your own self-awareness so that you're able to then effectively mentor others, which is what one of our core values is: service, integrity, respect, and excellence, right? So service to others is the best form of leadership, servant leadership.
That's terrific. And I love your line, Glynis, that you can't lead others until you can lead yourself. And self-understanding is certainly a very key part of that. That's a terrific point. Any other comments before we start looking at how we might handle some of these projects on a repeat basis?
Question.
Yes, Bruce.
You mentioned a questionnaire earlier. Is that part of the steps that you go through for that particular path project?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's part of the Understanding Your Communication Style project, and also part of the Understanding Your Leadership Style. We can have a look at those together later on in the session if you'd like to. I've got them handy.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
For sure. So let's look, how can these be handled on a repeat basis? I've completed level 2 3 times. And so with that thought in mind, you've got to know that I have done Introduction to Toastmasters mentoring 3 times. I've also repeated the Understanding Your Communication and Leadership Style projects. What do you think helps to be able to do those more than once? What factors do you think contribute? I know one for me is tied to the path that I'm doing. When I look at doing a speech on understanding my communication style, I look at what I'm studying. Am I studying strategic relationships? Am I studying visionary communication? How does my communication style impact what I want to learn and apply from this project? There's also so much more that I can look at with it, because my communication style isn't something that fits into a little box. It's something that impacts my life on a daily basis, with my family, with colleagues, with friends, and certainly with other volunteers in our organization. The likelihood that I've got a story about how my leadership style impacted something is pretty large. Matter of fact, the likelihood that I've got enough to do a different one every speech is also pretty large, because I communicate with people often. So
Also, Chris, one would hope that your communication style isn't static, that as you learn and grow and do some of these projects, that that you may modify your communication style in some way. And reporting on that would be an interesting project, one that certainly is hopefully repeatable if you continue to learn and continue to grow.
Definitely, that's a great point. Actually, that reminds me of something that happened to me just recently. I commented on a post my former stepdaughter had made on Facebook. The comment I made was one I thought was funny. It was intended to be a reminder of the days when her brother pulled out his own teeth so he'd get money from the tooth fairy. She completely misinterpreted my comment and responded in a way that indicated she was very offended. I hadn't ever considered the way she might interpret that comment, and we clarified the concern between us on Facebook. Once she realized what I meant, she also saw it as funny. But by paying attention to that communication style, I might have phrased something a little bit differently so that she didn't start out feeling offended. Anybody else have ideas as to how this might be handled on a repeat basis?
Stage time helps.
Sorry, Heather, I didn't catch the first part of what you said.
Stage time helps. It's bad enough that
yes,
my club has to listen to me go on about my personality traits once. With stage time, at least I can spread the misery around to different audiences.
Definitely. And there's probably a lot of aspects to your personal communication and leadership style, Heather, that you can bring out, even if you do happen to be doing that at the same club. But you're right, doing it at different clubs is a terrific way to get new feedback, but also to share a little bit of who you are with those. Anybody else?
Chris, in the old days, we did the Competent Communicator Manual, and many of us did it several times, and I don't think anybody ever did the icebreaker the same way every time. I mean, because we changed, we changed over time. So the projects in level 2 are really no different than that, because we change over time. So by the time we get back to doing another level 2 project, we thought about something different. I heard somebody say a comment earlier today about the fact that they had so much information that they could do an icebreaker 75 times or some number, because we've all got too much to say in that 4 to 6 minutes. Well, the same thing applies to these level 2 projects, is that we do it once and then we think about what we present and we get feedback. So now we're obviously going to do it differently next time. So I don't see it as an issue at all.
I agree. I don't think it should be. And the reminder about the Competent Communicator Manual is a good one. Many experienced Toastmasters, including myself, have done the CC Manual at least 2 or 3 times. Tony, how many times have you done that manual?
I think it's about 14.
And did you ever run out of things to do on the same project over and over again?
Absolutely not.
So why is there value in repeating and reinforcing discussion of communication, leadership, and mentorship? As Toastmasters, I would say all three of those tie very well both to our core values, but also to our purpose in serving those around us. By communicating, we have the ability to help others, to support them, to encourage them. Communicating and leading are aspects that, as Glynis referenced earlier, tie closely into mentorship. What else do you see as valuable in reinforcing those? We've touched on a bit of this already.
I just thought of something that the more you do these repeated projects, the more you become an expert at them and can help guide and mentor the members in your club.
Yes, that's a terrific point, Bruce. Thank you. Has anybody, yes.
One of the other things about doing these over and over again is that it allows you to shift your perspective, because you go in maybe the first time and you handle the project, you go in with one type of perspective, but then when you've had time to think about that project and then you go in a second time to do it, you go in with a different perspective. And because of that, it just broadens your viewpoint, even your core values, which happens to be integrity, respect, service, and excellence. They're broadened by the reinforcing, the repeating.
Yes.
And you can
very
also,
definitely.
Yeah, and you can also, what I'm trying to get at here, based on your evaluation of the first time around, you can change what you do for the second one.
Yes, that's a great point. The other thing is that as people, as humans, we keep changing, we keep evolving. None of us are the same person that we were yesterday or last week or certainly last year. The likelihood that you're doing 2 understanding your communication styles within the same month isn't large. And so you've got to change as well as to how you communicate, what you've learned, and as was previously said, what you've applied from past evaluation and from past study. I know from my own experience that when I've done the same test, like a DISC personality test, for example, more than once, I find new things in it. My results are never identical. There's always something that's a little bit different because who I am changes, just like who you are changes. And so now the big question, how can you make level 2 projects more interesting? Elton, can we have a look at poll number 1, please? All right, we can end the polling, Elton. Thank you. So let's look at our results. Only one person says they've ever heard or given a boring level 2 speech. That is great. Although I have to laugh a little at the person who said, aren't they all? 2 people said no. That's fabulous. I would love to know what you or the people in your club are doing. And I'm not sure, well, that's a pretty fair answer, because if you haven't seen a really great level 2 speech, you might not realize that something else was boring or that something else was great. Thanks, Elton. Can we stop the share now, please? Perfect. And we'll just close the poll. So a question to the people who said they haven't heard a boring level 2 speech. I'd like you to tell me about an interesting one that you heard. 2 people said they haven't heard a boring one. Come on now. All right, let me tell you what inspired me.
I think my communication style needs improving. I misread the question. I thought it was, have you given a boring level 2 speech? Hell no.
I'm proud of you there, Mike. Have you heard some boring ones?
Yes.
Exactly. Let me tell you what inspired me to get interested in level 2 and what really inspired me to want to do this workshop in general. When I started level 2, I was pretty new in Pathways. I was finishing my legacy DTM, and I got to these projects and I thought, how can I ever do something to make this interesting? I like the survey, I like the study, I like this is fun, but I don't know how to talk about this in a way that's fun. And then a Toastmaster in my home club gave a speech on the Introduction to Toastmasters Mentoring Project. And she told a story. She told a story about her personal experience as a mentee and how she really botched it in the first part of that period. And how, despite that, she and her mentor built a great relationship and she learned and gained a great deal from him. It was an interesting story. It was engaging. It could have been any speech. It didn't have to be Introduction to Toastmasters Mentoring, but it was. It fit the project's parameters perfectly, and the entire club was spellbound by this story. I looked at that, and I'd already done one boring level 2 speech at that point, and I said, I want my next level 2 speech to be more interesting. And that's when I wrote, Are You Listening?, which is a speech I've done a couple times for understanding your communication style. It's a speech about 2017 and the fact that it was a bit of a traumatic year for me. And part of that was my own fault, because as a direct communicator, I listen that way as well. And I wasn't listening to some of the subtle things in my life that were saying, hey, you should make a change. And I didn't hear. So it said again, hey, you should make a change. And I still didn't hear. And eventually I got hit on the head with a fry pan and told, make a change already. It wasn't the greatest way to learn something. But looking at that as part of my communication style helped me to gain a huge awareness of what was around me, what I could learn, and how that impacts every aspect of my life. And it was the beginning of what I hope are interesting level 2 speeches. What's an interesting level speech that you might do? Does anybody have a funny story about a leadership that failed or a communication misfire?
Yes, I could talk about communication misfires for the next week. And this may be an experience that is shared by most people who, when they first get married. I remember that my wife used to ask me, she would say, if we're watching television together, and she would say, are you watching this? Now you're going to laugh. I actually thought she meant, are you watching this? It took me through trial and error. I discovered eventually that she was not interested in knowing whether I was watching that program. And it wasn't even a question at all. It was actually a statement. And the statement was, I'd rather pull out my fingernails than watch this program another minute. I'm going to grab the remote now and put it on something else. But it took me a while to learn that that was what she meant, because I would respond, yeah, of course I'm watching it. It's obvious. Wrong answer.
Why are you asking? Exactly. And your wife obviously has a more subtle communication style, and I'm guessing yours is a little bit more direct, Mike.
There you have it exactly.
That's exactly what it is. I often go with the example of direct communicators who just get right to the point. I had a phone call with a direct communicator a few weeks ago, and we both know each other to be that sort of person. We leapt right into the topic at hand. There was none of this, hi, how are you doing? How was your day? What's the weather like there? None of those things, just, hi, so about this weekend. And we were both fine with it. And it wasn't until we were 10 minutes into the conversation that I realized that because we knew that about each other, we had dispensed with all those pleasantries that people who are perhaps a tiny bit less direct find good and positive. If I started that off with someone who was not a direct communicator, they'd probably be a little bit offended at the fact that I didn't say, "Hi, how are you today? What are you doing? You mentioned this last time we talked. How's that going?" And would have wanted that little bit of a warm up. What about leadership? Anybody been a part or witnessed a really great leadership fail?
I felt like it was a little bit of a stretch when I used my little red hen leadership style because it didn't fit one of the categories in the Cosmo quiz that they gave us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and how did you apply that, Heather? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I was going for a more humorous speech about a disastrous leadership pattern that I rather tend to use. You're familiar with the story of the little red hen, right?
Absolutely.
Turns out that very well then I'll do it myself is not the best leadership style for Toastmasters. I know it's shocking.
No, but it's one I understand sometimes.
I want to get the job done, dang it.
Precisely. And I would say that probably falls a bit into a bureaucratic leadership style at times.
It does. Mm-hmm. But it sounds a little bit more interesting if you put a storybook picture of a hen with a hoe up on the screen at the same time.
Absolutely, it does. That's a great way to bring some humor. Did your club enjoy that speech?
They claimed to, but Toastmasters are very nice. You can do the worst possible speech and they'll find something good to say.
Well, yes,
so I'll just stick to trusting the negative feedback.
I think it sounds like a really fun idea. And while there could have been growth points in your speech, I can see where bringing that humor in was a good way to talk about a quality that maybe you're not always proud of, but that you recognize in yourself, and that allows you to look at how you want to adapt that when you need to. I sounds like a fun speech. I'd kind of like to hear it. I did a speech along that same line, but certainly without the humorous story that you included, Heather. Mine was on a leader I worked with in a volunteer organization. She was authoritative but inactive and prone to telling people what to do, how they should do it, why she didn't like what they did, except she never did anything herself. There was a complete lack of praise or affirmation or encouragement or even a willingness to let other people do anything. Eventually, most of those of us who were actually doing something in the organization left as a result of it. And it was a good example for me of the leader I don't want to be. Sometimes I find those are useful as well. What about mentorship? Does anybody have an interesting story about someone who's mentored you in the past? Maybe somebody who didn't realize they were a mentor or fell into it accidentally or wasn't a mentor you would have expected.
I have to tell you about one mentor I had, Chris, years and years ago. The first fellow who first hired me in government, and we had lunch one day, and he said, "Mike, in order to stay employed by this organization," he said, "you have to make yourself as useful as possible. Ignore your job description. Make yourself as useful as possible." So I did that, and I managed to stay with the corporation for 34 years. But the funny thing is, the week after he told me that, he had this bad habit of doing the crossword puzzle at his desk. And within a week of giving me that advice, he got sacked.
Oh.
So
apparently he didn't follow his own advice.
That's it, exactly. He had good advice that he did not follow.
Yes. Well, that goes to some leadership style as well, doesn't it? As opposed to telling people what to do, lead by example. When you do a speech that's interesting or that's different, it's more fun, isn't it? Heather, when you did the little red hen speech, did you have fun doing it?
I had fun setting it up. My fun was reduced by not being sure that it quite fit the speech requirements, because I am very much on the side of following the rules.
Mm-hmm.
So there was some discomfort from that did reduce my fun.
Okay.
The level 2 speeches seem very lockstep to me. Do the Cosmo quiz, report on the Cosmo quiz.
Mm-hmm. They can, and I understand where you're coming from.
So I had fun, but I felt guilty about the fun. So it sort of balances out not great.
Yeah, I'm sorry you felt guilty about that, because it sounds to me like you addressed those objectives very effectively. And we can go back a little later and look at what those objectives were. But my recollection is that you're meant to look and work at what your leadership style is and look at how it impacts those around you. And from what you've described, it sounds to me like you addressed those objectives well. So let's brainstorm here. You've all got clubs to go back to, just like I do. You've all got level 2 speeches that are going to come up, whether they're this month or next year sometime. How can you make level 2 projects more interesting? What's an idea that you can take back to do?
Chris, I think using stories and practical examples, the story that Mike told about the fellow playing solitaire, perfect story to demonstrate all kinds of things. And I think if we can use our own or borrowed examples, that storytelling really does help with level 2 projects.
I agree completely. I think we all learn better, really pretty much anything, when we're doing it through a story, don't we?
I think using props is another way to make a presentation different and fun, and to be able to hold the audience's attention with very little effort. Anything to make these projects different. And I don't think that anyone should be afraid to go outside of the bounds that may hold them, but just to release yourself from all of that and just go for it. All of us have so many stories to tell. Why not use some of these and to to succeed in level 2?
For sure. So you would suggest perhaps looking at a story that you want to tell, and as Heather did with the little red hen, finding a prop that would support the story but also hold the audience interest.
Yes. I mean, we have an excellent way of doing that. We also have Zoom, and so using Zoom, you can use slides, video. All of these things that were not available to us before are available to us now.
That's very true. One line I always find interesting, and this is a line that appears in every single Pathways project: this project should not be a report on. Now, I don't know about you, but I've certainly heard a lot of level 2 projects that were precisely a report on. It's great to know your communication style, but if you're just standing up there and reciting that my communication style is this and it impacts me this way, chances are fair that you're boring yourself and your audience, and you're, to go to Heather's point, directly contravening what it says in the project. This project should not be a report on. You can talk about something without reporting. You can relate to something without reporting on it, and without just writing a verbatim essay on how that went. Let me tell you a little story. There's going to be a quiz at the end. You're driving a bus. It's a school bus. At the first stop, 4 children get on. At the second stop, 2 children get on and their mother stands there waving for a long time at them. At the third stop, 6 children get on. The school bus driver stops at the first school and 7 children get off. What color are the bus driver's eyes?
Brown.
What color are your eyes, Heather?
Brown. You just said I was the one driving the bus.
Exactly.
I'm not sure who trusted me to drive a school bus, but.
But Heather's exactly gotten the point of the story. We often get so lost in the details, in the intricacies, in the reading about this style or that style, or I did the quiz and I followed this and how am I going to do that, that we miss the point. We miss those key objectives that we looked at in the beginning. Look at what your communication style is. Look at how it impacts you in your personal and professional life. Talk about that. Nowhere in the project does it say, provide a detailed report on every single communication style. It just says, look at this, speak about that. We sometimes make things a little bit harder than they have to be. Remember, what color are the bus driver's eyes?
Chris, I thought that was going to be a math question. I was ready to yell out 5. Left on the bus. But I want to backtrack to your question about hearing a boring communication or leadership speech. And I remember hearing in a very short succession 2 of the understanding your communication style speeches, but this was probably over a year ago. Mm-hmm. And I remember listening to them and thinking, oh my God, is this ever boring? And I kept thinking to myself, am I going to have to do this? That kind of thing. But it could have been the way they presented it. So I'm not going to say that it is going to be boring to do, but it could have been the way that they presented it. I'm looking at my two paths. I actually signed up for my 3rd path, the freebie one that TI has offered, but I haven't activated it yet. But my DL and my EH, and the EH one does not have the communication and leadership question. Mm-hmm. But in your other question about how to do them differently or how to add to them, mm-hmm. I highly recommend injecting humor into every single speech, even if it's a eulogy at a funeral. Injecting humor mm-hmm. causes laughter, causes smiles, and people remember that. And I think that's an important part of any speech.
I agree completely, Bruce, and that's a great point. By injecting humor, you lighten up a topic that could be considered dry. You also probably feel better about what you're talking about. If you look at Mike's story about learning how to communicate about the television with his wife, I know I chuckled a little bit listening to that. I'm sure most of you did as well. Yep. That's a great example of how your leadership style, fortunately, did not impact your marriage negatively in the long term.
Yeah. Chris, if I could just share one more story briefly. Tony brought to mind, he's talking about the importance of telling stories mm-hmm. and personal experience. I was having one of the guests that we had at our district conference one year was Randy Harvey, who was a former world champion of public speaking and an ordained minister. And he was telling me, he said, well, this is one of the beauties of these conferences. You meet the most interesting people. He said he was brought out to the Middle East to do a keynote speech. And so he finished his keynote speech and he went in the bathroom and the guy accosted him. This is in Saudi Arabia or somewhere in the Middle East. It says, mm-hmm. oh, you know, Dr. Harvey says that was very interesting, but it wasn't really a speech. All you did was tell stories. So Dr. Harvey said, well, you know, Allah, praise be on him. Did he tell stories? He said, oh, yes, he did. Jesus of Nazareth, did he tell stories? He said, oh, absolutely. He said, well, if it's good enough for God, it's good enough for me.
That's a great example. Definitely. Reinforcing member value is an important part that we need to look at when we're looking at the level 2 speeches. If we go back and think about the key themes, we've got communication, leadership, and mentorship. I'm going to quiz you here. Who remembers what those contribute to? What do they contribute to within Toastmasters? What do those skills help you to do?
Contribute to your personality?
Well, they do contribute to your personality, and that's an asset both in Toastmasters and at home, I'm sure. But they also contribute to your ability to lead as a club officer, to fill a role as an area director, to conduct a club officer training session, or perhaps to get a promotion at work, or to be able to connect with that one of your children who just seems to speak a foreign language in your house and you can't ever deal with well, or that neighbor who you just really can't get along with. All of those bring us factors that help to build our lives as Toastmasters, as employees, as employers, as individuals, as volunteers, in whatever we're doing. And reminding our members why these things are valuable is another good way to talk to people and help them understand that these projects are good for you. They're not just there. Toastmasters International put these projects in because when we understand ourselves, as has been said a few times now, we've got the opportunity to take that information and use it to improve our dealings with others, to improve our leadership skills, to better serve and support others, and ultimately to be the best people we can. And I want to ask you now, what can you take away to make level 2 projects fun, interesting, and relevant in your club? I'm going to go first then. Don't be chained to reporting on the project. It says specifically don't report on the project. Take that at face value. Don't get lost in how many children are on the bus. What else can you take that will help make these projects fun and interesting and relevant for your club?
I already mentioned that just a couple of minutes ago. Add humor.
Absolutely. Humor is a great way to do that. And we've talked about some stories, and stories are a great way to inject humor as well. That's terrific. Any other thoughts?
Use personal experience.
Yes, that's a great one, Maya. Excellent. And I heard somebody else. Was that Elton?
Yes. Thinking about how to lead with compassion and patience. Those two qualities, I think, are really brought to the surface using level 2. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you find yourself in a position where you're leading, or you're a mentor, or you're the mentee, and you forget that having compassion and understanding, whether you're a mentee or a mentor, really helps you communicate better with the individual that you are communicating with.
Yes, it definitely does. And those are excellent filters that we can apply to really every area of our lives, of our Toastmasters experience, and certainly every area as we consider communication, leadership, and mentorship. Thank you, Elton. Does anybody else have an idea as to what you can specifically take away to make these projects fun, interesting, and relevant in your club?
I think just remember that that what we're provided with are guidelines around what around the topics themselves, the projects themselves, and there's a lot of latitude there, and sometimes we don't take advantage of that latitude.
I agree. It's always good to go and look at what the objective is, and those objectives are typically fairly broad. Look at this and see how it relates.
Remember that Toastmasters is a no-fail program. It is pretty much impossible to fail a project and be forced to redo it. That leaves a lot of leeway for experimentalism. Even if it doesn't work out, it's a learning experience, and Toastmasters is a place to go to fail, because failing here is safe and can develop your skills to succeed later.
That is a great point, Heather. And we all fail many times. It's nice to do so in an environment we know is safe, isn't it?
Chris, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Glennis.
So basically, this project is to identify your leadership style, your communication style.
Yes.
And present on that with examples or humor, right? Am I right? Or
yes, examples, stories, humor, the mention that you made earlier of using personal experience is a great one as well, because I think it's probably a very rare person who doesn't have a funny, sad, or ridiculous story about a communication or leadership experience that went very badly.
Okay.
That's terrific. Any other questions?
Yeah, one thing to think about with these projects is that they are speeches, and there's certain traits that speeches ought to have, and that we need to keep in mind when we're doing these presentations. Yes, the point is to discover your communication style and relay that in some way to the audience. But the other thing to remember is that every speech you give, whether it's level 2 or level 12, it should in some way benefit the audience.
Mhm.
How can the audience walk away with some information or with a call to action, just like we talked about with the old competent communicator manuals? Nothing's different in that regard. How can the audience benefit? What message can you leave with the audience? Not so much about yourself, true, but using yourself to illustrate a broader point, whether it's about communication or whatever the message happens to be.
Yes, that's a great point, Mike, and a very important one. You can always leave the audience with something of value, because as you consider yourself, it's pretty much automatically going to make them think about, oh, how does that affect me? And if you've done it in an interesting way, they're a lot more likely to be thinking that. Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, in that case, I'm going to take down the share. And Bruce, you had asked about the questionnaires in the level 2 projects. Did you want to have a look at that? Is that something that's of interest to others as well?
Sure.
Okay, fabulous. Give me just a second to get to those.
And while we were discussing stuff, I was Googling communication styles and leadership styles. So I've done a snippet of both. So I want to see if they match what the questionnaire is going to be.
They probably won't be exact, but this is what the questionnaire looks like. So this is from the PDF document. If you're going through this live in the Pathways program, this will come up on a screen-by-screen basis.
Okay.
I'm more of a print the PDF project kind of person. And so here you go, and this is going to look an awful lot like doing a DISC profile or a Myers-Briggs test. Please choose the word that is most descriptive of you. How do you like to be seen? How are you when you're collaborating with others? And once you've completed all these questions, it goes through and shows you what it is. So it's down here somewhere that it tells you how to add up the survey. There we go. Here's the scoring sheet. And so on the scoring sheet, you score yourself, or I presume it does it for you in the online version. You score yourself and you add your results up. I haven't looked at my results in a few months, but direct was a very high number for me, and initiating, supportive, and analytical were all a little bit lower. Okay, a lot lower. But the quiz for the leadership is very similar. And again, it lets you look at this. And sometimes people will come up with the fact that they're almost equal across all the communication styles. Maybe that's something that you would look at and talk about as to why are you that way? And how does that probably really great adaptability help you in life? Or how can someone else develop more of that?
One thing to remember too when you're doing any of these tests is that a personality test doesn't measure your personality. What it measures, and all any test can ever measure, are your responses. So what it will tell you is, here is what you believe your leadership qualities are, or your level of aggressiveness, or whatever the particular, and to understand that's really how you feel about yourself, rather than an actual measurement of your qualities. And it may very well be, when you start discussing these with other people, that you learn that their perceptions may be different. And this is all, it doesn't mean if you think you're an orange and someone tells you you're a green, it doesn't mean that the person who tells you you're a green is wrong. It means that their impression of you is different than yours. And this is all instructive stuff. It's all helpful stuff, but it all has to be seen in context.
That's a really important point, Mike. It reminds me a little bit of that illustration of the number 6 or 9 drawn on the ground. There's a guy standing at each end of it. One says that's a 6, the other says that's a 9. You're always doing these tests from your own perspective, and how you see yourself is a big factor. Heather, I see you've got a question in the chat as to what research backs the Toastmasters tests. The short answer on that is that I'm not sure, but that would be a great program to ask, of a great question to ask at educationprogram@toastmasters.org. They'd probably be the people with an answer on that. Do we have other questions, other comments? All right, well, if that's the case, then I thank you all for being here. I will put my email in the chat for anyone who doesn't already have it. But if you've got questions specific to this presentation, I'd love to address them for you. If there's additional information that you need, or you just want to have a chat about level 2, I'd be happy to hear from you anytime. And if you need a Pathways trainer for your club, Tony Nelson would love to talk to you about that. Tony is our Pathways chair here in District 60, and he'd be happy to provide some direction for you in that way. Thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful evening.